Tonight, under the gentle hush that settles when the world finally grows quiet, I invite you to lean into an idea as old as time, an idea that has drifted through centuries, passed softly from voice to voice, from mind to mind, until it arrives here with you, in this calm and tender moment. It comes from Socrates, who once walked the streets of Athens long before cities had lamps, long before wisdom lived in books. He believed that beneath all our worries, beneath the rush of thoughts that crowd the day, there is a deeper stillness, a quiet truth waiting patiently to be felt. And from that stillness rises a simple, enduring invitation. Know yourself. But Socrates never meant this as a task to strain toward. To him, self-understanding was something that blossomed slowly, like the night sky revealing one gentle star after another, unhurried, effortless. Tonight, we walk with Socrates not as seekers chasing answers, but as travelers, finding our way back to something familiar inside ourselves, a place where understanding grows, the way sleep grows quietly, naturally, without any need to try. Here, in this cradle of stillness, we begin again, gently and at ease. He stands at the threshold of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, a place where the air itself seems thin, charged with the electric anticipation of prophecy. This is Socrates. He is not yet the literary ghost haunting the dialogues of Plato, nor is he the marble bust gathering dust in a museum corridor. He is a man, alive, breathing the cool mountain air of Parnassus, staring up at a sequence of letters carved into stone. The words are brief, almost deceptively simple. Gnoti sauten, know yourself. For most travelers seeking the oracle's advice on harvest yields or war strategies, this inscription is merely a pious greeting, a bit of architectural decoration to be nodded at before passing through the pronaos. But for Socrates, the moment is seismic. It is not a greeting, it is a confrontation. It is not a suggestion, it is a command issued by the God of light and reason. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must strip away the centuries of accumulation that have softened the edges of this phrase. Today, Know Yourself appears on self-help book covers and in mindfulness apps, often reduced to a gentle encouragement to identify one's favorite color or emotional triggers. However, the historical record suggests that for Socrates, this was the ignition point of a radical philosophical engine. It was the beginning of a life defined by a specific kind of trouble, a trouble that would eventually dismantle the assumptions of Athens. The inscription at Delphi did not offer him an answer. It offered him a lifelong assignment. We often imagine philosophy beginning with a lecture or a book, but here, it begins with a pause before a temple. The ancient witnesses to Socrates' life insist on the centrality of this specific encounter. They tell us that his entire intellectual project, that famous and infuriating method of questioning everything, was not an act of arrogance, but an act of obedience to this Delphic instruction. He read the stone, and unlike the thousands who passed it by, he took it personally. He understood that to know yourself was not a destination one arrives at, but a way of being that one must construct. This brings us to a crucial distinction in how we view the history of this idea. There is a tendency among modern thinkers to dismiss the ancient view of self-knowledge as something overly simple or purely religious. Distinct from our complex modern struggles with the ego, we assume our anxiety about who we are is a modern invention. Yet, the scholarship suggests that the Greeks, and Socrates in particular, viewed this task as profoundly difficult. It was not about finding yourself in the sense of discovering a hidden treasure chest of personality traits. It was about the rigorous, often painful work of constitution, of building a self that is capable of bearing the weight of truth. Here lies a fascinating historical fact. The inscription Gnothi Sauton was one of several maxims inscribed at the temple, attributed to the 7 sages of Greece. These were not secrets. They were public wisdom, etched into the very architecture of the religious center of the Greek world. It implies that the command to self-knowledge was physically embedded in the landscape of Greek piety. It was unavoidable. When Socrates stood there, he was facing the collective wisdom of his civilization, which paradoxically demanded that he look away from the stone and into his own nature. But there is a deeper, rare detail hidden in the commentary of Aristotle that changes the texture of this story. Aristotle, who meticulously collected such precepts and even wrote about the origins of the Delphic inscription, describes the effect of this moment on Socrates using a musical metaphor. He does not simply say Socrates read it and started thinking. Aristotle writes that the Gnothi Sauton set the tune for Socrates. The Greek verb used is endidomi, which refers to giving the keynote or striking the opening chord that determines the pitch for the rest of the performance. Think of that image for a moment as you settle deeper into the quiet of your own mind. The command, "Know yourself," was not just a rule Socrates followed. It was the keynote of his existence. Every conversation he had in the agora, every uncomfortable question he posed to a general or a priest, and every moment of his famous perplexity was a variation on this single theme. Aristotle suggests that this inscription was the arch, the origin, and the principle of Socrates' search. It was the sound that resonated through his entire life, a hum that never ceased. When he questioned others, he was playing out the melody that began at Delphi. This musical influence helps explain why Socrates never claimed to have finished the job. If self-knowledge is a keynote, you don't achieve it and stop. You play in that key until the music ends. The text suggests that this encounter induced a mood of uncertainty and questioning in Socrates. It wasn't a moment of clarity, but a moment of profound confusion, a good confusion. It validated the idea that being puzzled about oneself is not a failure, but the necessary first step of wisdom. As we visualize Socrates turning away from the temple, stepping back out into the sunlight of the path, we see a man who has been burdened with a heavy gift. He realizes that the self is not a transparent thing. It is not obvious. The ancient texts remind us that self-knowledge is a thorny problem, filled with questions of introspection and epistemic warrant, even if the ancients used different words to describe it. Socrates walks away from Delphi not with a new dogma, but with a question mark burned into his mind. He has realized that the self he is supposed to know is currently a stranger to him. This sets the stage for everything that follows. The Socratic method, the irony, the relentless pursuit of definitions, all of it springs from this initial shock at Delphi. He is not trying to be difficult. He is trying to obey the stone. He is trying to resolve the dissonance between who he is and who the god says he must become. And in doing so, he invites us to consider that perhaps we, too, are strangers to ourselves. waiting for the right keynote to begin our own search. When we hear the echo of that inscription, Gnothi Sauton, rippling through the centuries to reach us today, we almost instinctively translate it into the language of our own time. We live in an era obsessed with identity. To a modern ear, knowing yourself sounds like an invitation to a very specific kind of inward journey. We imagine it as an archaeological dig into our own emotions, a quest to uncover a true self buried under layers of trauma, childhood memories, or societal expectations. We tend to think of it in therapeutic terms. To know yourself is to understand your feelings, to get in touch with your inner life, or perhaps to write a memoir of your own psyche. However, to walk alongside Socrates, we must gently set aside these modern spectacles. The philosophical landscape he inhabited was vastly different from the one we navigate today. Contemporary philosophers often treat self-knowledge as a technical puzzle, a question of how we can have privileged access to our own current thoughts. They ask, how do I know for certain that I am in pain? How do I know that I believe what I think I believe? It is a problem of consciousness and certainty, often divorced from how we actually live our lives. But for the ancients, and specifically for the figure of Socrates, self-knowledge was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a goal to be achieved. It was not something you had simply because you were conscious. It was something you won through effort. This creates a stark divide between the two worlds. Where we see a given "I think, therefore I am," they saw a distant summit. There is a fascinating historical consensus among scholars that often paints the ancient view as surprisingly austere. Many historians argue that when the Greeks spoke of self-knowledge, they were not talking about the warm, messy details of individual personality. They suggest that the ancients lacked the therapeutic orientation we cherish. In this view, knowing yourself might simply have meant knowing your place in the universe, recognizing that you are a mortal and not a god, and avoiding the hubris of overstepping that boundary. It was, supposedly, an impersonal check on ambition rather than a deep dive into the soul. Yet, there is a rare and nuanced detail that challenges this dry interpretation. While some scholars insist that Socratic inquiry had nothing to do with the couch of the psychotherapist or finding one's inner self, the Socratic texts themselves suggest something far richer. They hint that Socrates was indeed interested in the self, but in a way that is active rather than passive. He wasn't looking for a static inner self waiting to be discovered like a lost coin. He was engaged in self-constitution. This is a pivotal shift in perspective. For us, knowing ourselves often means accepting who we already are. For Socrates, it meant defining who we should become. The modern view often treats the self as an object to be observed. We look inside and report what we see. The Socratic view, however, treats the self as a project to be managed. It is less about introspection in the sense of spying on your own feelings, and more about monitoring and shaping your character. Imagine the difference between wandering through a house and building one. The modern seeker wanders through the rooms of their mind, cataloging the furniture of their emotions. Socrates, on the other hand, stands as an architect. He asks, is this wall stable? Is this belief solid? If not, it must be torn down and rebuilt. This is why the ancient path is so demanding. It requires not just honesty, but a kind of craftsmanship. This active, constructive nature of ancient self-knowledge explains why it was considered so difficult. If self-knowledge were just about knowing your own current mood, it would be easy. But if it means engaging in the practical work of making yourself into a person who is rational, consistent, and good, then it is the work of a lifetime. So, as we let go of the modern demand to simply feel our way to the truth, we enter the Socratic space where knowing is a form of doing. It is not a retreat into a private sanctuary of the mind, but a stepping out into a construction site. And the blueprint for this construction was drawn from that very first encounter at Delphi, where the command was not to look inward in isolation, but to stand before the God and begin the work of becoming human. To fully grasp the weight of the burden Socrates picked up, we must look closer at the stone itself. The inscription Gnoti Sauton was not a piece of graffiti scrawled by a passerby, nor was it the slogan of a local politician. It was etched into the pronaos of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the most sacred site in the Greek world. This placement is crucial. It meant that the command to know yourself was not human advice. It was considered the bidding of Apollo himself. It held the weight of divine law. When pilgrims arrived at Delphi, exhausted from their journey up the slopes of Mount Parnassus, they were there to ask the oracle about the future. They wanted certainty. Will I win the battle? Will my crops grow? But before they could hear the voice of the god speaking through the Pythia, they were confronted by this silent command from the 7 sages. It acted as a gatekeeper. It suggested that before you can understand the future or the will of the gods, you must first grapple with the enigma of your own nature. A significant historical fact illuminates this context. The inscription was part of a trio of maxims, alongside "nothing in excess" and "a surety," and "ruin is near." These were the pillars of ancient Greek wisdom, celebrated as the pinnacle of sage wisdom. For the average Greek, these were profound truths, but they were also riddles. They were not clear-cut instructions like a recipe. They were dense, opaque sayings that required a self-revising practice to understand. You didn't just read them and move on. You had to interpret them. This brings us to a rare and fascinating detail about the Greek mindset. We often assume that for the ancients, knowing yourself simply meant knowing your limits, remembering that you are a mortal and not a god. While that was part of it, the historical evidence suggests something far more complex. The Greeks recognized that the precept did not have a wholly transparent meaning. It was deceptively difficult. It demanded interpretation and glossing before one could even attempt to follow it. Imagine the scene: Socrates standing there, perhaps as a young man, realizing that the god is playing a game with him. The command is simple in grammar, but infinite in scope. Who is this self that must be known? Is it the body, the soul, the social reputation? The inscription offers no answer. It only offers the demand. This ambiguity is where the philosophy begins. Socrates' genius lay in the fact that he did not dismiss this ambiguity. He didn't assume he knew what the god meant. Unlike those who saw the inscription merely as a call to modesty, Socrates saw it as a provocation. The evidence shows that his deployment of the precept in his later conversations followed this earlier culture of veneration and scrutiny. He treated the words with a mixture of extreme respect and relentless questioning. This divine context elevates the stakes. If know yourself is a divine command, then failing to do so is not just ignorance, it is impiety. It is a failure to listen to the god. This adds a layer of religious urgency to Socrates' mission that is often lost in modern retellings. He wasn't just a pest annoying his neighbors with logic puzzles. He was a man on a holy mission, trying to solve the riddle set by Apollo. He understood that the precept was a divine thing, the most divine of all the Delphic inscriptions. And so, the silence of the stone spoke louder to him than the shouting of the market. It told him that the starting point of wisdom was not out there in the stars or the laws of physics, but right here, in the messy, unexamined reality of the human condition. The god had spoken, but he had spoken in a whisper that required a lifetime of listening to decode. History often remembers Socrates through the eyes of Plato, his most famous student. But there was another giant of philosophy who looked back at Socrates with a keen, analytical eye, Aristotle. Although Aristotle was born long after Socrates had drunk the hemlock, he offered a perspective on his predecessor that is both beautiful and technically precise. It is Aristotle who provides us with a crucial historical fact. He explicitly claimed that the Delphic inscription, "Know yourself," was what sparked Socrates' legendary perplexity and his lifelong search. For Aristotle, Socrates didn't just wake up one day and decide to be annoying. He was reacting to an external stimulus. The inscription was the spark that lit the fire of his inquiry into ethics, character, and the best way to live. But Aristotle's description goes deeper than a simple cause and effect relationship. He uses a specific Greek verb to describe what the inscription did to Socrates' endidomi. This brings us to a rare and poetic detail hidden in the grammar of ancient Greek. The word endidomi doesn't just mean to start or to begin. In a musical context, it means to set the tune or to give the keynote. Imagine a flute player before a performance, playing a single, clear note to establish the pitch for everything that follows. Aristotle compares the preamble of a speech or a piece of music to this paving of the way. So, when Aristotle says the inscription "Endidomi Socrates," he is suggesting that "know yourself" became the musical key in which Socrates played the rest of his life. It provided the tenor for his overall puzzlement. Every question he asked, every debate he entered, and every moment of confusion he shared with his fellow Athenians was a variation on that single, original theme. The inscription wasn't a map he looked at once and put away. It was the background hum of his entire existence. This musical metaphor changes how we see Socrates' famous ignorance. We often think of his confusion, his aporia as a lack of something, a hole in his knowledge. But through Aristotle's lens, this perplexity is actually the music itself. The inscription induced in Socrates this mood of uncertainty and questioning. It wasn't that he failed to find the answer, it was that he was faithfully sustaining the note. To know yourself was not a puzzle to be solved and forgotten, but a continuous performance. Aristotle himself was a collector of such maxims and inscriptions, so he understood the weight they carried. He recognized that for Socrates, the command to look inward was the beginning arche of a search that would never truly end. It was a search that colored his investigations into what it means to be a human being, turning a simple phrase on a temple wall into the foundation of Western moral philosophy. As we listen to the silence of our own rooms, we might wonder what keynote our own lives are played in. For Socrates, the music was difficult, demanding, and often dissonant to those around him, but he played it faithfully, trusting that the tune set by the god at Delphi was the only one worth following. Here is section 5 of the script for Socrates knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Section 5. The necessary perplexity. We often think of wisdom as a state of clarity, a moment where the clouds part and everything becomes sharp and defined. We imagine the wise man as someone who has the answers, who stands on a solid rock of certainty while others drift in the sea of doubt. But Socrates, guided by the stone at Delphi, introduces us to a different kind of wisdom, one that begins not with light, but with a specific kind of fog. This fog has a name in Greek philosophy, aporia. It translates to perplexity, bafflement, or literally, a state of being at a loss, as if one is blocked and cannot find a passage through. For most of us, aporia is a feeling we try to avoid. It is uncomfortable to not know. It feels like failure. But for Socrates, this perplexity was not a dead end. It was the fuel for his entire engine. The historical records provided by Aristotle suggest a profound cause and effect relationship that is often overlooked. He notes that the Delphic command, "Know yourself," is what actually set the tune for Socrates' perplexity and search. This is a crucial distinction. Socrates didn't just happen to be confused. The confusion was induced by the command. The inscription didn't solve a problem for him. It created one. It forced him to realize that the most intimate thing in the world, his own self, was actually a stranger. Imagine the psychological weight of this. You are told by a god to do something that seems impossible. The moment you try to know yourself, you realize how many masks you are wearing, how many of your beliefs are borrowed from others, and how little you actually understand about your own mind. This realization triggers aporia. It knocks the wind out of your sails. But in that stillness, in that pause of not knowing, Socrates found the space to begin. There is a rare and somewhat humorous detail found in the writings of Plutarch, who defends Socrates against a later critic named Colotes. Colotes was an Epicurean philosopher who mocked Socrates relentlessly. He laughed at Socrates for seeking out what a human is and for brashly asserting that he does not know it. To Colotes, this was absurd. How can you be a grown man, a philosopher even, and claim you don't know what a human being is? It seemed like a joke. But this mockery highlights exactly what made Socrates so dangerous and so necessary. Colotes represents the part of us that wants easy answers, the part that says, "Of course I know who I am. I'm me." Socrates represents the courage to say, "Do you really?" By admitting he did not know, by embracing the aporia. Socrates cleared the ground. You cannot build a sturdy house on a swamp of assumptions. You have to dig down to the bedrock, and digging requires removing the dirt. Aristotle's observation that the inscription gave the beginning arche to this search suggests that the perplexity was a form of paving the way. Think of a road builder clearing a path through a dense forest. The perplexity is the axe. It cuts down the arrogance, the false certainty, and the unexamined habits that clutter our minds. It is a destructive process. Yes, but it is a creative destruction. So, when we lie in the dark and feel the unease of not knowing where we are going or who we are becoming, Socrates sits beside us. He tells us that this dizziness is not a sign of sickness, but a sign of waking up. The god Apollo did not command, "Be confident in yourself." He commanded, "Know yourself." And the first step in knowing is admitting that, right now, we do not. This mood of uncertainty is the only soil in which the seed of true self-knowledge can grow. It is the silence before the music begins, the breath before the speech, the necessary emptiness that allows the self to be found. As we drift deeper into the Socratic mindset, we arrive at a fork in the road. One path is the one we are most familiar with in the modern world, the path of discovery. We often imagine that deep inside us, hidden beneath layers of habit and social conditioning, there lies a true self, a shiny, solid diamond waiting to be unearthed. We think that if we just dig deep enough, if we journal enough or think hard enough, we will find this hidden treasure and finally know who we are. But the texts surrounding Socrates suggest he took the other path, one that is far more active and, frankly, more demanding. The historical insight here is what scholars call the metaphysical thesis of Socratic self-knowledge. According to this view, knowing yourself is not merely an act of observation or introspection. It isn't simply taking an inventory of your current feelings, memories, or personality traits, as if you were counting stock in a warehouse. Instead, Socratic self-knowledge is defined as self-constitution. This is a radical shift in perspective. To constitute something means to set it up, to establish it, to give it form. The text argues that the effort to know oneself is not a struggle to discover something that already fully exists in the dark. Rather, it involves practical and determinative work. When Socrates responds to the call of Apollo, he is not just holding up a lantern to see what is there, he is picking up a chisel to shape what should be there. There is a rare and nuanced detail in how this process works. It connects the idea of knowing with the idea of becoming. The text explains that in responding to the precept, know yourself, the respondent actually defines and endeavors to become a certain kind of self. This means that you cannot truly know yourself until you have made yourself into something knowable. The project comprises the making of oneself into the right sort of thing. Think of the difference between a heap of stones and a finished wall. A heap of stones is chaotic, shifting, and hard to describe accurately. A wall is structured, stable, and defined. Socrates suggests that most of us, in our unexamined state, are like that heap of stones. To know the heap is impossible because it has no definite form. To know yourself, you must first build the wall. You must organize your chaotic beliefs and desires into a structure that holds together. This makes the Socratic method normative, which is a philosopher's way of saying it depends on judgments about what is best. You don't just accept whatever you find inside you. You evaluate it. You decide what sort of person you want to become, and then you do the work to become that person. This is why the process is described as personal and engaged. It requires labor on your particular beliefs, your specific desires, and your individual skills. So, the invitation from Delphi is not to go on a treasure hunt, but to enter a workshop. It is a call to creativity. The self is not a static object you stumble upon. It is a dynamic project you are responsible for creating. As you lie in the quiet of the night, this thought might feel liberating. You are not trapped by a true self that was determined at birth. You are, in the Socratic view, the architect of your own soul, constantly drafting and redrafting the blueprints of who you are, using wisdom as your guide. If the previous step in our journey was about construction, building the walls of the self, this next step is about what happens inside those walls. It brings us to the second face of Socratic self-knowledge, which scholars describe as the epistemic thesis. This sounds technical, but the image it evokes is one of profound stillness and clarity. It addresses a problem we all face when we close our eyes and try to look inward the noise. When we attempt to know ourselves in the modern sense, we are often overwhelmed by the sheer speed of our inner life. Thoughts race, emotions swell and recede like tides, and our desires contradict one another from one hour to the next. We are angry, then hungry, then nostalgic, then anxious. If you try to capture a self in the middle of that storm, it is like trying to take a photograph of a hummingbird in flight. All you get is a blur. Here lies a foundational historical concept of Greek philosophy that Socrates seemingly adopted: the idea that we can only truly know objects that are stable and perspicuous. For the ancient thinkers, knowledge wasn't just about guessing or having a fleeting impression. Real knowledge required a target that stood still. You cannot have a firm grasp on something that is constantly shape-shifting. If the object of your study keeps changing its nature, your knowledge of it becomes obsolete the moment you acquire it. This leads to a startling and rare realization about the Socratic method. The problem isn't just that our eyes are bad at looking inward. The problem is that the self we are looking at is not yet a proper object of knowledge. It is too messy. It is too volatile. Therefore, the goal of Socratic self-knowledge is not just to catalog the chaos, but to tame it. The text argues that coming to know oneself requires becoming more stable and perspicuous. Imagine a glass of water scooped up from a rushing river. At first, the water is clouded with mud and sand, swirling violently. You cannot see through it. You cannot see what is in it. This is the unexamined mind. The Socratic task is not to analyze the mud while it spins, but to let the glass sit, to let the sediment settle, to let the water become clear. Only when the water is still and transparent can you say you know it. This process is what the text calls the ideal of stabilization and clarification. It suggests that self-knowledge is a two-way street. You don't just observe the self. By trying to know it, you actually change it. You make it calmer. You make it more consistent. A person who truly knows themselves is not someone who simply knows they have a bad temper. They are someone whose temper has been understood, analyzed, and brought into a state of stability where it no longer surprises them or controls them. This view offers a tremendous relief to the weary mind. It implies that the confusion you feel about who you are is not a permanent defect. It is simply a sign that the work of stabilization hasn't finished yet. Socrates invites us to treat our souls like a garden that needs weeding, or a musical instrument that needs tuning. The goal is to reach a point where your beliefs about the world, your desires for the future, and your actions in the present all line up in a clear, unconflicted way. In the silence of this night, we can stop trying to chase every fleeting thought. We can instead focus on this Socratic ideal to become perspicuous, a beautiful word that means clearly expressed and easily understood. To be transparent to oneself. When the inner storm settles, what remains is the stable, clear, and knowable self that Apollo pointed toward. If you were to imagine a person seeking deep wisdom today, you might picture a monk sitting in a silent cave, or perhaps a writer locked away in a cabin, journaling by candlelight. We tend to associate knowing oneself with solitude. We think that to hear our inner voice, we must first silence the voices of everyone else. But Socrates, the man who roamed the noisy, dusty streets of Athens, offers a completely different and perhaps more comforting view. The historical reality of Socrates' life presents us with a paradox here. Was a man obsessed with the inner condition of the soul, yet he was almost never alone. He was always talking. He was always listening. This wasn't just because he was extroverted. It was a core part of his philosophy. The texts identify this as the practical thesis of his method. Socratic self-knowledge comes about especially in conversation with other people. This challenges the lonely burden we often place on ourselves. We think we have to figure it all out on our own, in the dark. But Socrates suggests that the self is not revealed in isolation. It is revealed in friction. Just as you cannot see your own face without a mirror, you cannot fully see your own mind without the reflection provided by another person. There is a rare and beautiful insight in the scholarship that connects our understanding of others with our understanding of ourselves. The text argues that knowing oneself is akin to, even continuous with, knowing someone else. Think about that for a moment. When you truly try to know a friend or a partner, you listen to their stories, you observe their reactions, you ask them questions to clarify their feelings. It is a skillful achievement that takes effort and attention. Socrates suggests that knowing oneself operates on a similar model. We learn to be human by interacting with other humans. When we explain our beliefs to a friend, we often realize mid-sentence that we don't actually believe what we are saying. Or, in defending a choice to a skeptic, we suddenly understand our own true motivations for the first time. The conversation acts as a testing ground. It is the laboratory where the self is exposed, examined, and refined. This Socratic view transforms the act of socializing from a distraction into a spiritual discipline. It means that every conversation you have is an opportunity for self-knowledge. You are working on oneself with others. The people around you are not obstacles to your wisdom. They are the co-authors of it. So, if you feel lost in your own head, spinning in circles of worry or doubt, the Socratic prescription is not to withdraw further. It is to speak. It is to find a dialogue. The burden of knowing yourself is too heavy to carry alone. It is a weight meant to be shared, passed back and forth in the rhythm of questions and answers, until the truth, like a spark between two flint stones, finally catches light. Socrates' insistence on self-knowledge did not emerge in a vacuum. In classical Athens, to know yourself was already considered a profound and demanding task. Yet many Athenians treated the Delphic precept as a moral reminder rather than a philosophical path, a warning against arrogance, a gentle nudge toward moderation. What Socrates did was elevate the phrase to an existential priority. He believed the entire quality of a person's life, choices, and character depended on how honestly they faced themselves. This belief sets him apart not only from his contemporaries, but also from many modern interpretations that treat self-knowledge as a psychological observation or a casual journey of self-expression. For Socrates, it was a disciplined pursuit, one that touched ethics, clarity, and the very structure of the soul. Athens in the 5th century BCE provides historical context that sharpens this picture. Public life was noisy, competitive, and intensely political. Orators sought influence, generals sought victory, and citizens navigated shifting alliances. In such a world, knowing who you were and what you were capable of was essential. Ancient sources tell us that many Greek thinkers warned against misjudging oneself because overconfidence often ended in ruin. Yet while others emphasized avoiding hubris, Socrates turned the idea inward. He wanted to understand what it meant to be human, not simply what it meant to avoid divine punishment. His conversations show a man probing the boundaries of knowledge and ignorance not out of fear, but out of curiosity. A curiosity rooted in the belief that a clearer inner life leads to a clearer outer one. A lesser-known historical insight underscores this shift. Some scholars note that early Greek attitudes towards self-knowledge were largely practical. Know your limits. Recognize your place in the cosmic order. Respect the gods. But Socrates reframed the entire question. He saw self-knowledge as an intellectual virtue, an ethical practice, and a way of shaping one's identity. In doing so, he expanded the meaning of the precept beyond traditional boundaries. He turned it from a rule of caution into an invitation to self-examination. And he believed this examination could change everything from how a person reasons to how they treat others. This belief explains why Socrates repeatedly linked self-knowledge to living well. For him, the two could not be separated. If you do not understand your own beliefs, desires, tendencies, and values, then your actions cannot be truly chosen. They are accidental, guided by habit, emotion, or social pressure. Self-knowledge, then, was the foundation of ethical freedom. It allowed a person to act not reactively, but intentionally. It allowed them to choose the good rather than stumble into it. And it created the conditions in which reason and virtue could grow naturally. Yet Socrates also recognized that people often resist this kind of introspection. Many prefer comfortable illusions about themselves. Ancient writers, such as Xenophon, recorded that some Athenians avoided Socrates precisely because he forced them to confront self-contradictions. They feared the discomfort that clarity brings. This resistance is not unique to the ancient world. Even now, people resist difficult truths about their motivations or flaws. Socrates understood this universal tendency thousands of years ago. Self-knowledge was not merely difficult because the human psyche is complex. It was difficult because the human ego is defensive. And in this sense, Socrates' approach foreshadows modern insights about self-deception and cognitive bias. One unusual historical detail deepens this understanding. Some ancient critics mocked Socrates for spending time on questions they considered trivial, such as, what is a human being? They believed he was wasting the city's time. But these criticisms reveal more about the critics than about Socrates. They show that many Athenians believed self-knowledge was unnecessary. They trusted instinct, tradition, and social identity more than rigorous introspection. Socrates saw the danger in this confidence. He understood that the unexamined life is vulnerable to error, arrogance, and injustice. The criticism he received only strengthened his conviction that self-knowledge was urgent, perhaps even more urgent than his society realized. For Socrates, the importance of self-knowledge was also tied to stability. A person who does not know themselves is inconsistent, sometimes courageous, sometimes fearful, sometimes generous, sometimes selfish, sometimes wise, sometimes reckless. But a person who knows themselves becomes more unified. They gain coherence. They understand what they value and why they value it. This stability makes moral action easier because decisions align with a deeper understanding of the self. Ancient texts support this view. Philosophers of the period often associated knowledge with order and chaos with ignorance. Socrates applied this principle inwardly. A soul that knows itself becomes ordered, and an ordered soul becomes capable of virtue. Socrates' belief in the importance of self-knowledge also influenced how he viewed knowledge of the external world. He often suggested that without clarity about one's own mind, any attempt to learn about the world would be flawed. If you misunderstand your own reasoning, how can you trust the conclusions you draw? If you misunderstand your motivations, how can you interpret anything accurately? This is why Socrates used questioning to expose contradictions. Contradictions are signs of inner disorder, and disorder blocks genuine understanding. Self-knowledge, then, was not only an ethical foundation, it was an intellectual one. Another subtle historical insight appears in later interpretations of Socrates. Some ancient writers insisted that Socrates did not merely encourage others to know themselves, he modeled the process through his own humility. His famous admission of ignorance was not a declaration of defeat, but a disciplined recognition of how difficult true self-knowledge is. Even as he guided others, he refused to claim mastery. This attitude reflects a deeper truth. The pursuit of self-knowledge is endless. The self is not a fixed object, but an evolving landscape, shaped by choices, conversations, and circumstances. To know yourself is to continually observe this change with honesty and patience. This brings us to the emotional dimension of Socratic self-knowledge, which is often overlooked. Socrates was not cold or detached. His pursuit of truth was infused with calm curiosity, a tone that continues to resonate in his dialogues. He believed that examining oneself required gentleness, a willingness to sit with confusion, to breathe through uncertainty, to follow a question without rushing to an answer. This gentleness is also what makes his method resonate with modern readers who seek clarity, not confrontation. It is not the shout of dogma, but the quiet of inquiry. The importance of self-knowledge for Socrates, then, lies in this complete transformation of the inner and outer life. It is an ethical compass, a source of steadiness, a way of refining thought, and a shield against self-deception. It is the starting point of wisdom, not because it contains all answers, but because it exposes the illusions that prevent us from seeking answers honestly. To know yourself is to stand on firm ground, ready to confront the world with clarity, humility, and integrity. This is the foundation on which the rest of Socrates' journey will unfold. Knowing why self-knowledge matters prepares us to understand how he pursued it, how he taught others to pursue it, and how this pursuit can still shape our lives today. Socrates' relationship with self-knowledge begins not with certainty, but with a puzzle. Aristotle, one of our most reliable historical witnesses, remarks that the Delphic command "Know yourself" set the tone for Socrates' lifelong perplexity. This is a rare and revealing statement. It tells us that Socrates did not approach the precept as a solved truth, nor did he treat it as a simple moral rule. Instead, he walked into it as one might walk into a mist, aware that something important was hidden inside, yet unsure of its contours. This perplexity, far from being a weakness, became the defining energy of his philosophical method. It shaped the way he questioned others, the way he examined his own life, and the spirit of humility he carried until his final breath. The notion of perplexity, aporia in Greek, needs to be understood carefully. It is not confusion for its own sake, nor an admission of defeat. It is an honest recognition that what seems familiar might actually be obscure. Socrates realized that people assume they know what courage, justice, friendship, or goodness are simply because they use the words daily. In the same way, people assume they know themselves because they have lived inside their own skin since birth. But Socrates suspected that this familiarity was a disguise. He felt a tension between the apparent simplicity of the precept and the deeper mystery it concealed. The more he reflected on it, the more he realized that the instruction, "Know yourself," was not merely demanding, it was enigmatic. A striking detail from the ancient world helps illustrate this. Several writers describe Socrates' habit of pausing in deep thought, standing motionless for long stretches as if absorbed by some inward puzzle. In one famous account, during a military campaign, he remained rooted in contemplation from dawn until the following sunrise. While this story has surely been embellished, it captures something essential. Socrates was not just a restless questioner of others. He was also a man who puzzled over the very foundations of inquiry itself. His engagement with the Delphic precept likely began in similar moments of stillness, moments when he felt the weight of not knowing. This puzzle grew sharper as he examined those around him. Socrates noticed that many Athenians lived confidently, even arrogantly, assuming they understood their purpose, their capacities, and their worth. Politicians claimed to lead with wisdom. Poets claimed inspiration. Craftsmen claimed expertise. Yet when questioned, their ideas fell apart. Their confidence dissolved into contradiction. This pattern convinced Socrates that the greatest obstacle to self-knowledge was not complexity, but complacency. People believed they knew themselves because they had never been forced to confront the alternative. His perplexity, in contrast, became a kind of protection, a sign that he refused to settle for superficial clarity. A lesser-known observation from ancient commentary deepens this picture. Some early interpreters argued that the command, "Know yourself," originally meant nothing more than recognize that you are mortal. It was a warning against thinking oneself equal to the gods. But Socrates intuited something richer. If the precept directs us to understand the limits of our nature, then it must also invite us to explore its possibilities. It must ask, not just, "What are you not?" but "What might you be?" This dual movement, from limitation to potential, forms the core of Socrates' perplexity. He knew the precept could not simply be about humility, nor simply about introspection. It had to be about transformation. This mixture of humility and ambition shaped how Socrates questioned people. He did not interrogate them to show superiority. He questioned them because the puzzle of self-knowledge demanded dialogue. If he could understand how others misunderstood themselves, he might understand how he misunderstood himself. This reciprocal structure explains why Socrates often said he learned as much from questioning others as they learned from being questioned. His perplexity was contagious once a conversation exposed a contradiction. Both he and his companion were drawn deeper into the mystery of the self. But perplexity for Socrates was not merely intellectual, it was ethical. He believed that people who think they understand themselves are prone to injustice. They act rashly, driven by desires they have never examined. They pursue power without knowing why they want it. They seek admiration without understanding their insecurity. They fall into anger, jealousy, or pride without seeing the deeper emotions beneath. Socrates recognized that self-ignorance is not neutral. It is dangerous. And so, his perplexity became a moral stance. To remain perplexed was to remain open, cautious, gentle, and honest. A fascinating, rarely discussed detail from later writers adds a subtle nuance. Some ancient thinkers claimed that Socrates' perplexity was a form of reverence. They believed he viewed the soul as something partially hidden from itself. requiring patience and respect. This interpretation suggests that Socrates' puzzlement was not only logical, but spiritual, an acknowledgement that the human self is not immediately transparent, that it must be approached with the same care one might offer a sacred object. Whether or not Socrates himself held this view, the idea resonates with his tone and manner. Perplexity also shaped Socrates' sense of responsibility. He believed that a person who confronts their own ignorance becomes less likely to harm others. When you realize how easily your thoughts can mislead you, you hesitate before passing judgment. When you admit you do not fully understand yourself, you become more compassionate toward those who struggle with their own confusion. This is why Socrates sometimes described perplexity as the first step toward wisdom. It clears away the illusion of mastery and prepares the ground for genuine insight. In the broader Athenian context, Socrates' perplexity was both admired and feared. Admirers saw it as proof of his unusual honesty, a man willing to confess what others hid. Critics saw it as subversive, even destabilizing. To those invested in authority, a man who questioned everything, including himself, was dangerous. His perplexity threatened the illusion that leaders and experts naturally understood themselves and therefore deserved influence. For Socrates, however, perplexity was not rebellion. It was fidelity to truth. He believed that any society built on unexamined self-confidence would eventually collapse under its own contradictions. This brings us to an important connection that will reappear throughout this journey. Perplexity is a sign that you have begun the process of self-knowledge, not that you have failed at it. To be puzzled is to recognize the depth of the self. To be unpuzzled too quickly, too easily, is to remain stuck at the surface. Socrates understood this deeply. His perplexity was not the end of inquiry, but the beginning of a better kind of life. Thus, the puzzle that opened Socrates' path was not an obstacle to be solved once and for all. It was a lifelong companion. It guided his conversations, shaped his humility, and protected him from dogmatism. And it continues to guide us today. For anyone seeking to know themselves honestly must also be willing to stand, as Socrates once did, in the quiet space between certainty and discovery, willing to be puzzled, and willing to let the puzzle refine the soul. To understand Socrates' pursuit of self-knowledge, we must look closely at the man himself, not the legend shaped by later centuries, but the historical figure whose presence left a mark on countless Athenians. Evidence from Aristotle, Xenophon, and later ancient historians shows that Socrates' life was not an abstract philosophical exercise. He lived among soldiers, politicians, craftsmen, and ambitious young men. And it was within this very human environment that the Delphic precept took root. Section by section, we will see how his public and private life mirrored his intellectual mission. But here, at the threshold, we must ask, who was the Socrates who made Know Yourself the cornerstone of his existence? Socrates was born around 470 BCE and spent nearly all of his life in Athens, a city vibrating with political tension, artistic brilliance, and endless public debate. He lived during the Golden Age, fought in the Peloponnesian War, and died in the turbulent aftermath of political collapse. The man himself was physically unremarkable. Short, stout, barefoot by habit, and often mocked for his appearance. Yet those who knew him described an inner steadiness that bordered on the uncanny. He could endure cold that froze soldiers to their bones, He could drink more wine than others without losing clarity. And in the midst of chaos, he remained eerily composed. These historical details matter because they shape the way he embodied the very self-knowledge he sought. He was not merely a thinker, he was a deliberate presence. One rare and fascinating detail comes from a contemporary comic playwright who mocked Socrates as someone who stares at the clouds and asks what man really is. Though exaggerated for humor, the joke reflects a widely recognized trait. Socrates constantly questioned the nature of human beings. He was not concerned with heavenly bodies or metaphysical systems. He was concerned with the inner workings of people, how they lived, what they valued, and why they made certain choices. The fact that comedians felt compelled to parody him shows how visible and unsettling his questions were in Athenian culture. Even those who criticized him could not ignore the strange precision with which he exposed people's hidden assumptions. Aristotle strengthens this portrait. He tells us that Socrates was the first philosopher to turn away from the study of the physical world and toward ethical inquiry, especially through definitions and persistent questioning. This historical point is crucial before Socrates. Greek thinkers were preoccupied with nature stars, matter, movement, being. Socrates redirected philosophy inward, toward the human condition. He saw that the greatest mysteries were not out in the cosmos, but hidden in the folds of the soul. Therefore, when he encountered the Delphic precept, "Know yourself," he did not interpret it as a reminder of mortality or humility alone. He saw it as a calling to investigate human nature itself. This shift had enormous consequences, both for Athens and for philosophy. It unsettled those who believed they already understood what it meant to be a citizen, a leader, a craftsman, or a parent. Socrates questioned generals about courage, poets about inspiration, politicians about justice. Many were offended, but others felt strangely illuminated. They reported that conversations with him left them more aware of their own inconsistencies, and yet more alive to the possibility of clarity. Socrates had a way of making people feel simultaneously exposed and strengthened. It is no coincidence that many young Athenians flocked to him, seeking a guidance that felt both intellectual and personal. One lesser-known historical detail supports this dual influence. Ancient commentators mention that Socrates' home was modest, his possessions few, and his daily habits simple. He did not seek wealth or reputation. Those who observed him sometimes described him as living with nothing to hide. This phrase, though poetic, captures something vital. Socrates embodied transparency. He understood that self-knowledge required a stripping away of unnecessary desires and illusions. By living simply, he made his inner life more accessible not only to others, but to himself. His poverty was not deprivation, it was clarity. Yet even with this clarity, Socrates did not claim mastery over self-knowledge. In fact, one of his most striking historical traits is his refusal to say he had achieved what he asked others to pursue. This humility was not false modesty. It was an honest recognition that the self is too complex, too shifting, too deeply layered to be fully understood in a single lifetime. Those who walked with Socrates felt that they were journeying with someone who was both guide and companion, someone who questioned not from superiority, but from shared vulnerability. The man who changed philosophy began by admitting that he did not yet know himself fully. This humility parallels another lesser-known detail. Socrates often likened his philosophical role to that of a midwife. Just as a midwife assists in the birth of another's child, but cannot give birth herself, Socrates assisted in the birth of clarity in others without claiming to produce wisdom himself. This analogy appears in several ancient accounts and reveals a profound truth about his method. The midwife sees what the mother cannot see. She guides what she cannot control. She encourages what she does not own. Socrates viewed himself in the same way. Through reflective questioning, he helped people become more aware of themselves. But he refused to take credit for the insights that emerged. Self-knowledge, he believed, must be owned by the person who discovers it. Another key historical dimension of Socrates' life involves his encounters with opposition. Many Athenians misunderstood his motives. They saw questioning as insolence, humility as evasion, and perplexity as ignorance. Some believed self-knowledge was irrelevant to the flourishing of the city. Others found his relentless probing socially disruptive. This resistance culminated in the charges that eventually led to his trial and execution impiety and corrupting the youth. While these accusations were politically motivated, they reflect a deeper tension in Athens, one between outward success and inward clarity. Socrates' insistence on self-knowledge challenged the foundations of a society built on reputation, ambition, and public approval. Yet, even in facing death, Socrates maintained the same calm presence described by earlier witnesses. He examined himself, questioned his accusers, comforted his friends, and walked toward his fate without bitterness. This is why he remains such a compelling figure. The historical Socrates was not a scholar in a library. He was a human being navigating uncertainty, conflict, and suffering with unwavering self-possession. His life itself became evidence that self-knowledge is not an abstraction, but a form of resilience. The historical record thus gives us a Socrates who lived his philosophy with rare coherence. He questioned everything, yet he was never lost in doubt.
He acknowledged ignorance, yet he radiated strength. He pursued self-knowledge, yet he never pretended it could be completed. In him, the Delphic precept became a living practice, a way of moving through the world with clarity, curiosity, and moral steadiness. As we continue this journey, the figure of Socrates will remain our anchor. His life shows that self-knowledge is not a retreat from the world, but a deeper engagement with it. It is a form of honesty that demands courage, and it begins, as it did for him, with the simple recognition that one does not yet understand oneself fully. To understand how Socrates transformed the Delphic command into a lifelong discipline, we must now look beyond the external details of his biography and consider the inner architecture of his practice. For Socrates did not merely speak about self-knowledge, he structured his days, his conversations, and even his friendships around it. The surviving historical testimonies reveal a man whose philosophical method was inseparable from the rhythms of his life. If we follow these traces with care, a clearer picture emerges. Socrates' pursuit of self-understanding was not a private meditation, but a public way of being, enacted in the very heart of Athenian society. One of the earliest clues comes from the way Socrates spent his mornings. Accounts suggest that he walked to the agora not with the intention of issuing doctrines, but to encounter whoever happened to be there, merchants arranging goods, citizens preparing for assemblies, young men boasting of political ambitions. These interactions were not accidental, they were essential to his method. Socrates believed that self-knowledge emerged in the friction between perspectives. Alone, one falls too easily into complacency or forgetfulness. But in conversation, especially when one's assumptions are probed, one becomes aware of the fault lines within one's own thinking. The agora,
noisy and crowded, became the perfect laboratory for this kind of introspective engagement. Socrates' presence there demonstrated a conviction that understanding oneself required engaging the world, not withdrawing from it. This public dimension did not mean that Socrates neglected the solitary aspect of self-examination. Xenophon recounts moments in which Socrates would fall into sudden, profound stillness. During military campaigns, he was sometimes observed standing motionless in thought for hours, once even for an entire night. These episodes were not mystical trances, but deliberate exercises in attending to the movements of his own mind. They reveal that Socrates' self-knowledge was cultivated through a balance of inward silence and outward dialogue. He listened to the quiet interior voice that examined motives, desires, and fears, and then returned to the city to test and refine whatever insights emerged. This dual method within and without helps explain the distinctive atmosphere of Socratic conversations. Witnesses often remarked that he had a way of slowing time. Questions unfolded patiently, almost gently, yet they penetrated with disarming precision. A politician might begin a conversation boasting about justice, only to discover, through Socrates' calm inquiries, that his concept of justice dissolved upon examination. A poet might claim divine inspiration, only to realize that he could not explain the very terms he used in his verses. These moments were not intended to humiliate. They were attempts to bring people into genuine contact with themselves. Socrates knew that clarity requires passing through discomfort, and he accompanied his interlocutors through that discomfort with a surprising steadiness. But there is another dimension of Socratic self-knowledge often overlooked: his understanding of emotion. Despite the stereotype of Socrates as a purely rational figure, ancient sources hint at a man acutely aware of the power of feelings. He spoke frequently about the danger of unchecked anger, the subtle workings of desire, and the deep vulnerability inherent in loving another person. For Socrates, emotions were not obstacles to self-knowledge, but windows into the soul. If one paid attention to what stirred one's anger or longing, one could uncover hidden values and unexamined fears. The famous claim that the unexamined life is not worth living applies as much to the emotional life as to the intellectual. Socrates' ability to remain calm amid crisis was not a denial of emotion, but the fruit of having explored and understood it. One anecdote about his relationship with his wife, Xanthippe, sheds light on this emotional discipline. Ancient writers, often unfairly, portrayed Xanthippe as temperamental. Socrates, however, treated her frustration not with mockery, but with patience, remarking that living with someone spirited sharpened his ability to remain inwardly composed. The point is not whether this characterization is historically fair. Rather, it reveals how later traditions understood Socrates' emotional resilience as something rooted in his commitment to understanding himself in the midst of ordinary human relationships. He was not detached from the world. He was present within it, using each encounter as material for reflection. Another striking element of his pursuit of self-knowledge lies in his conception of virtue. Socrates refused to separate moral excellence from understanding. To him, courage, justice, moderation, and wisdom were not independent qualities, but aspects of a unified self governed by reason. This did not mean cold rationality. It meant harmony. A person who truly knew themselves would not act against their own deepest understanding of the good. Wrongdoing, in Socrates' view, came from confusion, from failing to see clearly what one really wanted or valued. Thus, The quest for self-knowledge was simultaneously a quest for moral integrity. To know oneself was to become whole. This framework becomes even more compelling when we consider his influence on the young Athenians who gathered around him. They were drawn not simply to his intellect, but to the coherence between his ideas and his life. Many Athenians of standing possessed eloquent speeches, yet their behavior contradicted their words. Socrates, by contrast, lived in radical alignment with his own principles. He owned little, desired little, and asked questions not to dominate, but to illuminate. His students saw in him a rare model of philosophical authenticity. To them, self-knowledge was not an abstract concept, but a lived reality they could observe daily. This authenticity becomes especially visible in the final phase of Socrates' life, during his trial and imprisonment. When asked to propose an alternative to the death penalty, he famously suggested that he be fed in the Prytaneum, the honor reserved for Olympic champions. Far from arrogance, this statement was an expression of his belief that he had served Athens by encouraging its citizens to examine themselves. Even when facing death, he remained committed to the principle that a life worth living is one guided by honesty. In prison, as friends urged him to escape, he refused not out of passivity, but because fleeing would violate the ethical consistency he had spent his life cultivating. Socrates chose death not because he valued life lightly, but because he valued self-knowledge more. His final hours, described with stark simplicity by Plato, deepen this portrait. As he drank the hemlock, he continued to discuss the soul, encouraging his companions toward clarity rather than despair. His composure was not stoicism for show. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent understanding himself. In that moment, the historical Socrates, the barefoot soldier, the restless questioner, the patient midwife of thought revealed the full power of the Delphic command. To know oneself was to live without fear. What, then, does all this teach us? The historical Socrates invites us to view self-knowledge not as a solitary introspection, nor as a purely intellectual pursuit, but as a way of inhabiting the world with integrity. It requires openness, courage, emotional honesty, and a willingness to face our own contradictions. It is a lifelong practice rather than a final achievement. This is why Socrates remains a figure of enduring fascination. He lived the tension between certainty and humility, conviction and vulnerability. He acknowledged what he did not know, yet he walked through Athens as if knowledge were always possible, as if clarity were within reach for anyone willing to look inward. As we move forward, Socrates will continue to serve as our guide. His life demonstrates that self-knowledge is not isolation, but engagement, not retreat, but presence. It demands discipline, but it also offers freedom, the freedom to see ourselves truthfully and to act in accordance with that truth. And in this ongoing exploration, we begin to understand why the words inscribed at Delphi echoed so deeply in him. They were not a warning or a command alone. They were an invitation to live awake. If we wish to understand why Socrates' commitment to self-knowledge continues to resonate across millennia, we must now widen our lens. For the pursuit he initiated in the streets of Athens did not end with him. It reshaped the trajectory of Western philosophy and, more importantly, offered a blueprint for the examined life that remains strikingly modern. The historical fragments of his life are not relics of a distant past. They are mirrors in which we recognize our own struggles, the struggle to understand ourselves, to act with integrity,
to resist the pull of unexamined assumptions. What Socrates uncovered about the human condition is as urgent today as it was in the tumultuous world of ancient Athens. One of the most revealing aspects of Socrates' legacy is the way his students interpreted his method. Plato, perhaps his most devoted disciple, transformed Socratic questioning into a philosophical art form, the dialectic. Yet even in Plato's highly stylized dialogues, Socrates is portrayed as someone who consistently redirects attention inward. When a character insists on discussing political structures, Socrates returns to the question of virtue. When someone tries to defend a viewpoint by appealing to tradition, Socrates probes its foundations. This relentless inward turn is not an escape from the world. Rather, it is a recognition that all meaningful action flows from clarity within the self. In this sense, the Platonic Socrates preserves the essence of the historical Socrates, the belief that the roots of justice, courage, and wisdom lie in the disciplined examination of one's own soul. Xenophon, by contrast, offers a more pragmatic portrait. His Socrates is less mystical, more grounded in everyday ethics. He emphasizes moderation, self-control, and the ability to govern one's own impulses, qualities essential for anyone seeking to lead a coherent life. In Xenophon's accounts, Socrates teaches through concrete examples how to cultivate good habits, how to respond to provocation, how to refine one's character through thoughtful action. These writings remind us that self-knowledge is not merely introspection. It is the cultivation of a disposition. It involves turning insight into behavior, aligning one's outward life with inner understanding. Aristotle, though writing after Socrates, clarifies something even more profound. He observes that Socrates was the first to search for universal definitions of ethical concepts, courage, justice, virtue, because he believed that clarity of definition reflected clarity of soul. In Aristotle's view, Socrates' quest for definitions was not pedantry but psychology. To define a virtue was to reveal the structure of one's own moral reasoning. This reinterpretation underscores the radical nature of Socrates' project. He sought not just to understand the world, but to understand the workings of the human mind. In this sense, Socrates can be seen as a precursor to both moral philosophy and cognitive psychology. Yet what truly distinguishes Socrates is his refusal to offer final answers. Most philosophers before him sought to construct systems, explanations of nature, theories of origins, cosmologies that mapped the heavens. Socrates dismantled these ambitions. He believed that the desire for finality often obscured the deeper, more unsettling truth that human understanding is always partial, always evolving. His embrace of uncertainty was not despair, but a form of intellectual honesty. He recognized that admitting ignorance was itself a kind of knowledge, a clearing of space for genuine insight. This attitude is perhaps the most countercultural aspect of Socrates' philosophy, especially in a world like ours, saturated with noise, opinions, and the pressure to appear certain. To appreciate the full significance of Socratic humility, we must examine how it shaped his relationships. His conversations were not interrogations, they were invitations. He approached people as fellow travelers on the same difficult path of self-discovery. Even when his questions provoked discomfort, they were motivated by a desire to help others uncover blind spots within themselves. His method presupposed that every person possesses the capacity for wisdom, provided they are willing to look honestly at their inner life. This belief in the universality of self-knowledge is one of Socrates' most enduring contributions. It democratized philosophy. Wisdom was no longer the privilege of mystics or elites.
It was available to anyone capable of honest reflection. A revealing but often overlooked detail is the way Socrates responded to praise. When admirers expressed amazement at his composure or intelligence, he redirected attention away from himself. He insisted that whatever clarity he possessed came not from innate superiority, but from continual examination. This stance is crucial for understanding the depth of his integrity. Socrates did not perform self-knowledge. He lived it. He understood that the pursuit was difficult, humbling, and never complete. Yet he embraced it with a steadiness that inspired generations. This unshakable commitment to the examined life becomes especially striking when we consider the social and political turmoil of his time. Athens during Socrates' life was marked by war, plague, shifting governments, and intense public anxiety. Many citizens sought security in tradition or power. Socrates sought clarity. He believed that even in chaos, one could cultivate an inner stability grounded in truth. His composure in the face of adversity was not indifference, but perspective. He understood that external circumstances, though significant, could not determine the integrity of one's soul. This distinction between what lies within our control and what lies outside it would later be developed by the Stoics, but its roots lie in Socrates' quiet resilience. Another essential element of Socrates' pursuit of self-knowledge was his belief in the moral dimension of truth. For him, clarity was not merely intellectual, it was ethical. To know oneself was to confront the moral implications of one's choices. He believed that wrongdoing harmed the wrongdoer more than the victim because it damaged the integrity of the soul. This principle reveals why Socrates treated self-knowledge as a matter of profound seriousness. It determined the quality of one's existence. A life guided by unexamined impulses was, in his view, a life governed by forces one did not fully understand. True freedom required understanding the self that chooses. This ethical dimension also explains why Socrates rejected revenge, resentment, and bitterness, even when facing death. His final days serve as a demonstration of the examined life's power. He comforted his friends, reflected on the nature of the soul, and faced his fate with a calmness that left an indelible impression. His death was not a tragedy of defeat, but a testament to his philosophical conviction. By remaining faithful to self-knowledge until the final moment, he showed that philosophy was not preparation for argument, but preparation for life and, ultimately, preparation for death. What remains, then, is the question we must carry forward. What does it mean to know oneself today? Socrates does not give us a list of doctrines or commandments. He offers something far more challenging, a practice, a way of seeing, a way of interrogating our motives, fears, and desires, a way of living with honesty and courage. In a culture that often mistakes information for understanding or noise for clarity, the Socratic call to self-examination becomes a quiet act of resistance. It invites us to step back from the rush of distraction and attend to the unfolding drama within our own minds. As we continue this exploration, Socrates stands not as a distant historical figure, but as a companion. His life teaches us that self-knowledge is not a final destination, but a continuous unfolding. It is a slow, patient work, sometimes unsettling, often humbling, always transformative. And like Socrates himself, we begin wherever we are in the midst of our relationships, our challenges, our ambitions, our confusion.
The journey inward has no shortcuts, but it is the journey that makes us human. If we look more carefully at the enduring appeal of Socratic self-knowledge, we begin to see that its power lies not merely in its intellectual elegance, but in its resonance with the universal human condition. Across every era from ancient Athens to our own age of distraction, the same tensions remain: the tension between who we are and who we wish to be, between what we know and what we avoid knowing, between the noise of the world and the quiet truths within us. Socrates becomes compelling not because he resolved these tensions, but because he dedicated his life to inhabiting them honestly. To continue our journey with him, we must turn to the deeper layers of what he believed the examined life required. One of the most striking aspects of Socrates' legacy is how deeply relational his philosophy is. Self-knowledge, for him, was not a private escape into the mind. It emerged in conversation, in community, and in the shared search for truth. He understood something profound. Human beings often discover who they are in the presence of others. The questions we fear, the contradictions we conceal, the hopes we rarely articulate, these come to the surface when someone, with patience and sincerity, asks us to look more closely. Socrates' conversations were not debates to be won. They were collaborations in uncovering truth. His presence created a space where people confronted parts of themselves they had ignored. This relational dimension invites us to rethink what self-knowledge really means. It is not a static state of awareness, but an ongoing interaction between our inner life and our lived experience. We come to understand ourselves in reflection, but also in action, in solitude, but also in relationship, in moments of calm, but also in moments of conflict. Socrates saw that each human encounter is a mirror, revealing aspects of the self we might otherwise overlook. The philosopher's task, then, is not to withdraw from the world, but to participate in it with openness and attentiveness. Another important layer of Socratic thought concerns desire, far from being indifferent to human longing. Socrates took desire seriously, perhaps more seriously than any thinker before him. He believed that our desires reveal what we think will make us happy, and that understanding them is essential to understanding ourselves. But he also recognized that desire can be deceptive. We often want things that, when examined closely, do not truly serve us. This insight forms the backbone of his ethical practice. To align one's desires with one's understanding of the good is the essence of wisdom. This is why Socrates insisted on interrogating those who claimed to know what they wanted. His questions were not meant to belittle. They were meant to uncover the hidden structure of desire. What do you seek? Why do you seek it? What do you believe it will bring you? In answering these questions, people discovered the inconsistencies in their own thinking. Some realized they pursued wealth not for its own sake, but for security. Yet their lives were still governed by anxiety. Others discovered that they sought honor without understanding what truly deserved admiration. In each case, Socrates' questioning invited them to refine not only their beliefs, but their entire orientation toward life. This emphasis on desire brings us to a core insight of Socratic philosophy, that self-knowledge is inseparable from self-mastery. To know oneself is to recognize the forces at work within one's own soul, and to shape them deliberately rather than be governed by them unconsciously. This does not imply suppression or rigidity. Rather, it is an invitation to cultivate an inner harmony, a balance between reason, emotion, and impulse that allows one to live with purpose and clarity. Socrates believed that when we understand our desires, fears, and motives, we become capable of directing our lives rather than being pulled by them. But this vision is not achieved by solitary effort alone. Socrates lived among friends, students, critics, and even enemies, and he treated each interaction as part of his philosophical practice. He believed that human beings cannot attain clarity in isolation. We need others to challenge us, to question us, to accompany us. We need the friction of dialogue to sharpen our understanding, and we need the humility to recognize that our perspective is always incomplete. This shared journey toward understanding is one of the most humane dimensions of the Socratic tradition. Another aspect of Socrates' pursuit of self-knowledge that deserves attention is his sensitivity to the limits of human understanding. He repeatedly acknowledged that the self is not a simple object to be grasped, but a dynamic process. Our motivations shift, our values evolve, our beliefs deepen or dissolve. To know oneself, then, is not to capture a final picture, but to remain in conversation with oneself. This approach requires patience, honesty, and a willingness to revise our assumptions. It also requires a tolerance for uncertainty, a recognition that clarity does not always arrive as a definitive answer, but sometimes as an increased ability to navigate ambiguity. This readiness to dwell within uncertainty is perhaps what made Socrates so unsettling to his contemporaries. In a culture that prized confidence and oratory skill, he embodied a different kind of intelligence, one rooted in reflection rather than rhetoric. He did not claim to possess wisdom, he claimed to seek it. His humility challenged the social norms that equated eloquence with truth. In our own time, where certainty is often performed rather than earned, the Socratic willingness to say, "I do not know," becomes a radical act. To appreciate the full depth of this humility, we must return momentarily to the Delphic inscription, "Know yourself." For many Greeks, this phrase was a warning against arrogance, a reminder of human frailty. Socrates accepted this meaning but expanded it. For him, knowing oneself was not only an acknowledgement of limitation, but a path toward moral clarity. It required scrutinizing the assumptions that shape our lives, the stories we tell ourselves, and the habits we fail to question. In this sense, self-knowledge becomes an ethical journey, a gradual unveiling of the truth within. This unveiling is rarely comfortable. Yet Socrates believed that discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is the birthplace of transformation. He often described philosophical inquiry as a kind of labor, akin to the work of a midwife assisting in birth. Just as birth requires effort and pain, so too does the emergence of insight. But the result, a clearer understanding of oneself, offers a freedom that cannot be achieved through avoidance or denial. This freedom becomes particularly evident when we examine the legacy Socrates left to subsequent philosophical traditions. The Stoics inherited his commitment to rational self-examination. The skeptics inherited his awareness of uncertainty. The Epicureans inherited his emphasis on desire and the pursuit of a well-shaped life. Each school, in its own way, extended the Socratic insight that clarity about the self is the foundation for clarity about the world. And yet, what makes Socrates unique is that he lived this insight with unparalleled consistency. His life was not free of conflict, misunderstanding, or tragedy. But he navigated each moment with a calm born of inner alignment. He understood that the true measure of a person lies not in external success, but in the quality of their soul.
This conviction guided his choices, shaped his relationships, and ultimately defined his legacy. As we draw this section to a close, we find ourselves returning, once again, to the central question: what does it mean to live an examined life? Socrates offers no formula, no doctrine, no path guaranteed to lead to certainty. Instead, he offers a posture of openness, a commitment to truth, and a willingness to confront the unknown within ourselves. His life stands as a reminder that self-knowledge is not an achievement, but a practice, a daily effort to see clearly, act wisely, and live fully. In the chapters ahead, we will continue to follow Socrates not as a distant historical curiosity, but as a living invitation. An invitation to ask deeper questions, to listen more carefully, to examine our lives with courage, and perhaps, like the Athenians who encountered him centuries ago, we will discover that the journey inward is inseparable from the journey outward, that to know ourselves is, in a profound sense, to know how to live. And so, as you settle into this quiet moment, allow each breath to become a soft reminder you are here, now, and nothing else is required of you. The world outside can wait. Every worry, every unfinished thought, every echo of the day gradually loosens its grip, like sand slipping through open fingers. Let this space be a gentle invitation to rest, a sanctuary where your mind can wander without fear, where your heart can soften, and where your body can finally release the tension it has carried for far too long. In this stillness, you are safe to simply be. When you listen, not just with your ears, but with the quiet part of yourself that longs for peace. When you breathe as though each inhale is a small act of healing, and each exhale is a letting go. Here, in this slow unfolding of calm, you are allowed to rediscover the lightness you thought you lost. And as the night deepens, may the gentle rhythm of these words guide you closer to the calm you deserve, a calm that asks for nothing, demands nothing, and welcomes you exactly as you are. As you rest here, let the darkness of the night become a soft blanket, not something to fear, but something that holds you gently. Night is not an ending. It is a quiet beginning, a place where the noise of the world fades just enough for you to hear your own inner voice again. You may notice thoughts drifting by like slow-moving clouds. You don't need to chase them or push them away. Just let them pass. Each one is only a visitor, and you are under no obligation to entertain them. This moment is yours, untouched, unhurried, unclaimed by any demand. Feel how your breath deepens naturally, without effort, with every inhale. Imagine drawing in a little more softness with every exhale. Feel yourself untangling from the weight you carried throughout the day. Bit by bit, the mind grows quieter, the body grows lighter, and the space within you expands. In this gentle spaciousness, you may begin to sense something subtle, a quiet kind of clarity, the kind that only arrives when everything else becomes still. It isn't loud. It doesn't declare itself. It simply appears, like a small lantern glowing somewhere inside the heart. Let that inner glow guide you deeper into rest, deeper into ease, deeper into yourself. And as you drift a little further inward, imagine that you are walking through a quiet space within your own mind, a place untouched by urgency, where everything slows to the rhythm of your breathing. Here, nothing is expected of you. Nothing is judged. Nothing is demanded. This is the space where philosophers throughout history often found their deepest insights not in moments of tension, but in moments of rest. When the mind becomes soft, it also becomes spacious. And in spaciousness, wisdom finally has room to speak. Maybe tonight, it whispers to you that you don't have to hold everything together all the time, that it's okay to pause, that it's okay to feel tired, that it's okay to let go. Feel how your body responds to that permission. Shoulders releasing, chest softening, breath loosening like a knot slowly coming undone. There is nothing you need to do right now except simply be, and as you settle more deeply into this state, let the gentle truth of the night remind you you are safe to rest, safe to unwind, safe to drift into the quiet world that waits behind your closed eyes. Let sleep come to you like a friend walking toward you through the dark, unhurried, patient, and always arriving exactly when you're ready. And as your breath continues to settle, imagine the night wrapping gently around you, like a soft cloak laid across your shoulders. Each inhale draws the coolness of stillness into your lungs, and each exhale lets go of something heavy you've been carrying without noticing. This is the natural rhythm of release, the same rhythm that nature itself follows. Trees let go of their leaves. The ocean lets go of each wave. Even the stars release their light into the vast quiet of the universe. You, too, are allowed to let go. Tonight, you don't have to hold your thoughts tightly. You don't have to make sense of anything. You can simply let each thought drift to the edge of awareness and slide silently into the dark, like a small boat carried away by a gentle current. As your mind softens, let it wander into a landscape shaped not by stress or memory, but by peace. A place where each step you take falls on soft ground, where the air carries the faintest scent of quiet rain, and where the horizon stretches endlessly in a calm blue haze. There is no destination here, only the soothing act of walking, of existing, of resting. It is in landscapes like these that philosophers often found the beginnings of their deepest reflections, not through force, but through surrender, not through effort, but through presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the inner citadel, a space within each of us that remains untouched by chaos. You are standing in that space now. Nothing here can disturb you. Nothing can reach you unless you invite it. Let this thought float gently across your mind. I am allowed to rest. I am allowed to slow down. I am allowed to be human. You have carried so many roles, so many responsibilities, so many expectations perhaps from others, perhaps from yourself. But the night doesn't ask for any of that. The night only asks for your presence. It welcomes you exactly as you are, with your triumphs, your worries, your unfinished tasks, your unanswered questions. All of it can be set aside now, like stones taken out of your pockets. Take a slow breath in and release. You might notice a subtle shift, a kind of melting inside your chest, a loosening in the muscles around your eyes, a softening of the mind. This is what it feels like when the body remembers its own wisdom, when it recalls that rest is not a luxury, but a natural state, when it remembers that sleep is not an escape, but a homecoming. As you sink deeper into this soft space, imagine a small, warm light glowing at the center of your being, a light that pulses gently, not demanding attention, simply existing. With each breath, This glow expands very slightly, warming the cold corners of your mind, easing tension from places you forgot were tight. This is the light of awareness, quiet, neutral, compassionate. It does not judge you. It does not hurry you. It simply stays with you, like a silent companion walking beside you in the dark. Allow yourself to lean into its warmth. Let your thoughts slow until they move like clouds drifting across a moonlit sky. Slow, gentle, dissolving at the edges. If a thought appears, greet it softly and let it pass. Nothing is urgent now. Nothing requires your energy. Feel your breath. Feel your weight sinking into the place where you rest. Feel your body being carried effortlessly by the silence of the night. You might begin to sense that you are floating, not rising upward, but floating inward into a deeper layer of calm you rarely get to visit during the day. Here, time feels different. It stretches, widens, softens. Moments are slower, smoother, more spacious. This is the realm where the thinking mind begins to fade, and the quiet mind starts to take its place. In this space, imagine sitting beside a still lake. The water is smooth as glass, reflecting the pale glow of distant stars. Each star ripples gently when your breath touches the air. The surface is so calm that even a single thought would create a visible wave. So you choose not to think. You choose to simply exist, to breathe, to rest. Philosophers often spoke about returning to oneself, not as a retreat from the world, but as a way to rediscover the world with clarity. You are returning to yourself now, to the version of you that is free from haste, free from noise, free from the constant tug of tasks and expectations. And the further inward you drift, the more you realize something simple, that peace was never far away. It was always here, waiting beneath the surface of your days, waiting for the moment you finally exhaled deeply enough to reach it. You are safe here. You are held by the night. You are accompanied by silence. Let the heaviness in your limbs become a gentle invitation to sleep. The way your body sinks, the way your breath deepens, the way your mind quiets, all of it is guiding you toward rest. And as the last bits of wakefulness dissolve, imagine a soft voice not outside, but within, whispering, "You've done enough for today. You've carried enough. You can rest now." Feel that truth wash over you. Feel how your mind agrees. Feel how your body welcomes the surrender. Let yourself drift, slowly, gently, into the deep, quiet place where thought becomes dream and dream becomes pure presence. Sleep is already coming toward you, patient, calm, familiar, like a tide returning to the shore. You don't need to reach for it. Just let it arrive. And as your mind begins to settle into that soft twilight space between waking and dreaming, let everything become just a little lighter. Let each sound grow distant. Let each thought feel like it's made of mist. You are drifting now, not away from yourself, but deeper into yourself, into the part of you that knows how to rest without effort, the part that knows how to trust the night. In this gentle darkness, imagine a slow blooming of silence, like a flower opening under moonlight. It unfolds petal by petal, and with each unfurling you feel a little more at ease, a little more supported, a little more free. The world around you grows softer, the edges of things blur. Your thoughts become warm echoes, fading somewhere behind you. Let them fade. Let them dissolve. Let them fall into the distance where you no longer need to follow. Breathe in and feel the coolness of night filling you. Breathe out and notice how every exhale carries you further into calmness. Your inner world is becoming wide, now a spacious field of quiet. You can lie down here. You can rest here. You can stay as long as you need. And as you settle more deeply, picture a small lantern glowing beside you. The flame is steady, unflickering, safe. This is the symbol of your inner wisdom, the part of you that has survived every storm, every confusion, every heavy night. It glows without asking for anything. It simply stays with you, illuminating the path inward. Move closer to it. Feel its warmth. Feel the reassurance it brings. And now imagine sitting beside this lantern, wrapped in a blanket of silence. The night around you is vast, but it is not empty. It holds you gently, like cupped hands around a fragile light. In this space, nothing can disturb you. Nothing can pull you away. You are held. Let your breath become slower, longer, deeper. Feel how with each inhale you gather softness, and with each exhale you melt into the quiet. Somewhere far beyond your awareness, the world continues the clocks, the noise, the unfinished tasks. But none of that belongs to you now. Not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for returning to the small, steady truth of your own being. And in this stillness, a thought rises softly, like a ripple across calm water. It is enough to simply be. You don't need to solve anything. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to understand everything. You can let all of that wait for tomorrow or the day after, or whenever you are ready. Tonight, your only task is to soften and drift. Feel the weight of the day slipping off your shoulders like a cloak laid gently on the ground. Feel your hands unclench. Feel your jaw loosen. Feel your heartbeat slow, steady, peaceful. You might feel as though you're sinking, but in the safest way. Sinking into comfort. Sinking into warmth. Sinking into a silence that welcomes you fully. This is the moment where sleep begins to weave itself into your consciousness slowly, cautiously, like threads of light woven through a dark tapestry. Let the weave happen. Let yourself be carried. And as the last traces of wakefulness soften around you, imagine a quiet voice within whispering, "You are safe. You are home. You can sleep now." Let that truth move through your body like warm water. Let it cradle you. Let it guide you gently toward the quiet world waiting behind your eyelids. You are drifting, floating, falling softly into rest. There is nothing you need to hold on to anymore. You can let go. Sleep is here. Sleep is yours. Sleep is ready to wrap around you like a gentle tide returning to shore.